Hey, this video is sparked after watching Frank Yang's most recent video on enlightenment and stages of enlightenment and various other perspectives that are generally only going to be uncovered in the I guess we could say final or later stages of authentic awakening. And if you haven't seen any of his work or his videos, I'd highly recommend going to watch that and check that out. But in the most recent video, it just reminded me of a video topic I wanted to speak to that was also spoken to a bit in a recent Instagram post about the absolute source or the absolute. And in the comments, there was an extended discussion on the topic of true compassion and love. And in relation to um, what Frank was speaking about, which was absolute love or absolute compassion. What does this mean? Often, of course, on the enlightenment path, um, when we're speaking to the absolute or this final enlightenment or realization, at least from what we know in the common scene of spirituality, topics of love and compassion aren't often as much spoken about because we're speaking more to this direct knowing of no thing or the true self, and that true self that is really undefinable, not something that can be grasped by mind, or we can't put our hands on it, we can't perceive it, we're not aware of it. It's not an experience like some peak psychedelic thing, the true awakening, true enlightenment, like what is often described as before enlightenment chop wood carry water, after enlightenment chop wood carry water. It's really nothing that you will conceive in some glamorous picture, or something that the mind has fantasized about, like of what it thinks it is. It's generally none of those things. And so often, when we speak to enlightenment, we speak about those types of descriptions, those types of um, explanations around things. Of course, when you get into things like Kahlonic science or more advanced light body teachings, it's kind of the quantum reality where we find that enlightenment is not really any particular endpoint or description. It's actually described by so many different things, and there's so many different directions and ways to go about it in that realm, which is also very reflective in Buddhism. In Buddhism, there's so many different masters that some attained a certain light body, others didn't. Some went in some directions, others didn't. Some stayed in the cave, others didn't. It very much is kind of an individual experience. And what I have found post awakening, almost 4 or 5 years now, or 4 years, you know, this process of deepening and integrating into what we could describe as absolute love or compassion is something that I feel is a very important topic. And it's an important topic with or without speaking to the absolute, but in the way that Frank described it in his video, and in the way that I've experienced it, and way I'd like to add on that or just continue to reflect. Um, I also, see the importance of us understanding, firstly, what love and compassion truly is, what the absolute is, and what does it mean to awaken to our true sense of love. Like for instance, we've come up with the idea of unconditional love, right? Unconditional love. Well, unconditional love is just kind of, this invention in a sense, because we've had so much conditional love, right? And this conditional love is coming from this place of, holding to this identity, this separate self that will pick and choose what it wants to love, will pick and choose what is worthy, it deems worthy of loving. And this is what we go about in our whole existence. We find ourselves siloed in various groups or belief structures or dogmas or tribes that believe or think or have certain opinions or perspectives on things, and those are the people that we will love, and then others we may not. And this goes across the entire scale of consciousness in some sense, from all the spiritual groups to the complete not spiritual groups, and in everything in between. And so, to expand deeper on this idea of our egoic based loving or compassion, it's really coming from preconceived definitions, preconceived ideas as to what we view to be love, what we view to be compassion. And in so many ways, it really is the spiritual path, this discovery, because the golden rule, for instance, treat another as we desire to be treated, is the entry level teaching as much as it will inevitably be the supreme teaching as well. Because the golden rule is actually a very non dual or absolute teaching, because it's pointing to the reality that everything is yourself. But of course, if you don't know that, then you're only going to love, or you're only going to treat another, as you would desire to be treated, to the degree in which you know the self, right? And so most get confused with that statement and think it has to do with themselves, this body and what they know to be this. So, they're going to love people to the degree in which they know themselves and their identities and their opinions and their traumas and their perspectives and their triggers and endless, amalgamations of this separate self identity. So love and compassion cannot truly emerge from this space. We're only going to get a glimpse of what love and compassion truly is, because we're still holding ideas about it. And one thing that was interesting also in his video, and what I've heard, I think we all can kind of come to this because it relates to so many things in our life. When we truly know something, it's not something that we're constantly having to reiterate within ourselves. It's not something we're constantly having to convince ourselves that we know it. And I spoke to this about belief versus knowing, and how often we see people running rampant with certain conversations on social media, and it's almost like they're really just trying to convince themselves as much as they're trying to convince other people. And of course, that's the paradox. Usually when we're really trying to convince other people about something and there's this kind of push about it, it's really because we're not so sure about it ourselves. And so the more we have others who believe what we believe, then we can feel stronger and more confident in that energy. But of course, we can see the illusion in that. And so when we truly know love and know compassion, we're not making anything out of it. In my recent podcast with Jack, he was speaking to kind of the space cadet kind of archetype in the New Age circle, those who are generally doing a lot of psychedelics, generally chasing a lot of bliss states, generally kind of going from guru to guru, teacher to teacher, ceremony to ceremony, just constantly chasing these experiences. And in that energy, there's always this big drama about everything. There's always a big story about everything. There's always something really important about everything. And of course, this is coming from their own self-importance. This energy like, I'm some ascended being, or, I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, I'm this, I'm spiritual, I'm that. And that identity keeps pushing. It keeps pushing, and it's fiending like an addict almost for more and more experiences, because there isn't actually a true knowing that's rooted there. There's no actual knowing about reality or the self. There is just a perpetuation of more experiences that gives the illusion that there's knowing, gives the illusion that there's something. And we can see this, you don't need to go so far, then go through social media and you'll find endless examples of this. And it could sound like a judgment, I guess, but judgment or discernment would be a better term. Like, we have to be clear about who or what we're listening to, and if that is really going to bring us to what we're seeking. And of course, if it's the blind leading the blind, then there's just a perpetuation of more of delusion. And we may find ourselves there, at some point, but it may take a lot longer. So it's important that when we come to, to recognize that when we have known something, there's a different way in which things are going to be spoken about. There's a certain foundational essence or presence that you're going to feel off of someone speaking from the space. Like any expert soccer player or artist or musician or whatever. It's just there's just something about it, right? So coming back to the topic of love and compassion, often even in the spiritual scene, when we speak to love and compassion, there's a lot of ideas about these things, like being of service, right? There's all of these kind of preconceived ideas as to what that needs to look like. So often someone in the spiritual space or seeking or something, they're going to feel this pressure all the time. I got to be of service, I need to be loving and being compassionate to everyone. So it holds this identity, it holds this image that has to be upheld. And because of course the ego is going to feel lesser if it's not upholding that basically 24/7. So within that energy, there's only really a belief around love, and it may come from a very well-intentioned place. It may come from from what we would say like a true place on some level, but there's still suffering attached to this love and compassion, because again, it needs to look like something. It needs to be upheld. There's this efforting that has to move, and yet, if we were just walking down the street and we saw someone that was kind of down and sad, and we caught eyes with them, and you know we may feel this natural pull to just speak to them, to connect with them, to ask them how their day was, even just give them a smile and keep walking. And we could say that, well, this is just the most spontaneous and simple way in which love potentially can emerge. And of course, even if as I'm saying this, this can create an image in the head where we're looking for the next stranger to find who we can help. But I'm just giving a simple example about love and compassion just can naturally, spontaneously arise when we know it within ourselves, because we are it. So it's not something that we have to objectify and create as a means to an end to say get more enlightened or to become more spiritual. It is an emanation of our natural essence, our natural self. It is the natty state, as Frank speaks to it, the natural state, the natural self. So this exploration of love and compassion is the foundation of the golden rule. It's where we circle back to the golden rule, the most entry level basic spiritual teaching that is actually the supreme teaching in the same way. And that is why all great masters have spoken the same teaching across all different geographies, all different timelines, same main teaching that was spoken, because this is what we fundamentally know when we come back to this natural self. So for this to occur, obviously various teachers speak to different practices. I've spoken about my experiences with rasa, my experiences with Kaylonic science, my experience with authentic self-inquiry, which does actually bring in elements of vipassana. These authentic practices, if we're looking at self-inquiry, vipassana, and we're doing an authentic looking at ourselves, an authentic meditation, which is beyond just entry level kind of breath meditation or awareness or whatever. We're really going into the core, to the root. We're uprooting all ways in which we're holding ideas and images about, let's say, what love and compassion looks like. We're dissolving all that. We're dissolving all the fabricated fantasies, images, examples, ideologies around this love and compassion, the conditioning, what we've been told, the traumatic projections we have about love and compassion. And we're going to the most fundamental root of dissolving all ideas, returning to that no thing, that space of the true self, where the self is known. Absolutely, it's known, but it's not coming with the myriad of projections that a lot of other things in our life may come with, right? Every concept of language that we're defining often is coming with, some further projection of our individual perception of what that may be and what that would look like, right? So this discovery of true love and compassion is in so many ways a dissolution. It's a dissolving. It's a coming back to, and on a certain level, we could say it's not even a dissolution or dissolving. We're not actually dissolving or dissoluting anything. We're resting in what is true. And that is an ever-present kind of process or flow. But of course, as we come into this, for certain, we've come to a certain knowing about this, then even in the myriad of the changing realities and circumstances and situations and the endless experiences that we may flow through or move through, or, we're not really moving, but I'm just kind of giving some sort of example here, then love and compassion can naturally, truly arise in the most authentic and simple way. And so this is all coming full circle into the conversation in the comments that was on my post about the absolute source. And one of the comments was asking the question, how do we take these writings or these descriptions of the absolute source, where we recognize the perfection of all and the perfection of even the most glorious and the lowest of low, and we see that everything is a manifestation of the self. It is the self. Everything is independent and dependent only on itself. And so every arising is essentially, God's source, consciousness, the absolute, no thing. Like it is everything compacted into just what it's appearing as. And so the comment expanded on, how do we reconcile conversations around, let's say a child getting harmed in the most atrocious way, or these various examples of what we look out in our world and see right now that are being revealed to us, as the consciousness, the light is expanding and the darkness is, of course, being revealed. How do we reconcile this? Well, we come back to the description, we come back to something that's so clear and so important, and often something we may have heard many times before, which is just seeing something just as it is. What does it mean to simply see something just as it is? Well, when we've collapsed everything back to its source, back to this origin, no thing point, where we've moved through all the layers of a particular subject matter, like as I've spoken about before in, my kind of Vipassana-based energy healing practice, which is if we're feeling a certain tension or a trigger point or something within our body, we're literally moving through all these onion layers of the definitions, opinions, ideas, triggers, traumas, judgments, conditioning, etc., 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 that we're holding through the onion layer of that particular subject matter. And as we get to deeper and deeper layers, we feel this fluidity, we feel this lightness, this openness, this spaciousness, and to the space where it feels like there is really no thing there. There is, and this is of course when it simultaneously dissolves. So when we're seeing and we're going through the layers of what is something is appearing as, and we get to that origin point, this is the Vipassana process, this is the self-inquiry process. We're getting to that origin where we see that there isn't actually anything there, but yet at the same time there is a fullness. So it's almost like you go pierce through the onion and then you circle and contract back, where you see that exactly as this Kleenex, let's say, or this sweater or this blanket or whatever is appearing, is exactly as and what it is, reconciling that we're seeing the appearance of what it is in the practical light. We see the blanket or whatever, but in reality we see only really the self, and we see no separation between ourselves and what this is appearing as, because we know that everything is made up of the same, one no thing or fabric or reality. And so when the way that this becomes so practical in the most atrocious of examples, we can simultaneously see the atrocity of what something is. We're not trying to label it as more spiritual. This is what, so many spiritual people and, in the love and light and cluelessness type of scenario we find, where there's this attempt to paint a picture over something that's atrocious. Paint a picture of it being more glamorous, and there's a meaning to it. There's some synchronicity. There's some hidden, gem that we can find in this atrocity. And in so many ways, this is actually what demeans the situation. It disrespects the situation on some level. It does not provide any real love and compassion, because what could be more uncompassionate than not really hearing, listening, feeling, directly knowing and experiencing what something is, especially when someone is presenting, a suffering, when they're coming in a place of suffering or pain, and they do not see it, like we may see it. They don't maybe have the tools or see that they have the tools to see something in the way that we may be able to see it. So in the perception that we are engaging something that is, so atrocious, atrocious or filled with suffering or what have you, we may not feel necessarily the same, all the suffering, and feel into that illusion, but it's not that we're disregarding what something is appearing as, because we can actually see what it truly is, right? This is the joy of all miracle healing, as I spoke about just a couple of days ago, or just the other day in a post. All miracle healing is coming from that place of true love and compassion, not a love that has an agenda or a compassion that needs to be of service. A true love that sees the reality of the self, the reality of this no thing and everything and something, and all of it together, encapsulated in what's being perceived as this appearing situation, you know, the disease, the suffering, the not so fun situation, what have you. And in all miracle healings, it was simply the kind of agreement of the other being, you know, the perceived other being or individual who also wanted to see in that way, or maybe couldn't yet. And in that, through their own acceptance, that is where the miracle kind of conjoins into one, and the healing emerges from the being who is perceiving, you know, like these Jesus characters or these various enlightened ones that we've heard have done these various healings, and we have maybe been an example of that in our own life. And then the perceived other who is in a space where they're willing to accept the reality as well. And then the gift of grace, the gift of the source, the gift of this self, this pure essence, naturally then emerges and works the so-called healing. And this is where we find that, you know, these healings happen in almost miracle and instantaneous fashion, because true love and compassion, you know, has been seen, has been known in that moment. And so, you know, what could be more compassionate and loving than to just simply see something exactly as it is, not trying to paint endless amounts of new pictures on top of something, basically as a way to escape the realities of what one is experiencing as well, what one may be feeling, the inner judgments, the projections, the ways to escape, you know, what they're seeing. You know, no, we're not trying to paint any other picture. We're seeing it exactly as it is, and we're recognizing that in our neutrality of this experience, where we just simply see and know the self, even as we're perceiving some atrocity, this is how we can be of greatest service, you know, and love and compassion in any, you know, particular scenario. So in my view, this is where the absolute realization or description becomes a very practical knowing. And in my experience, it's an ever deepening process, really, to deepen back into the heart, back into the body, back into the day-to-day reality. That happens on its own. It's not even really something that needs to be done. But as it happens, and as it is happening, you know, these perspectives and these realities just continue to emerge and are directly lived. And that's what's so important, you know. We're living this reality. It's not just a concept or an idea that we're painting and, you know, kind of just going through in our mind all the time, you know. So this is a longer video, but I was inspired to finally do this video, as I have been intending for some time, you know, by Frank's conversations and some of the things that I've been noticing on my page as well. So yeah, hopefully this was supportive. You know, please do share and apply, live, you know, as best as you can.